You got to admit.
Okay, I now call this meeting to order at 7 p.m., September 6th, 2022. For the audience here today, the City of Glendora utilizes a hybrid meeting format to allow for participation both in person and virtually. In consideration of others in the business conducted tonight, please silence your phones and any electronic devices and refrain from speaking unless recognized. Let me take some of my own advice here. Okay, this is a public meeting for the community of Glendora. We appreciate and respect your participation here tonight. We'll now conduct roll. Madam Chair, would you please conduct roll call?
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I would like to conduct an oral roll call and request that each commissioner respond with present when their name is called. Commissioner Becerra.
Present.
Commissioner Norwood.
Present.
Commissioner Ursetti is not here. Vice Chair Koss.
Present.
And Chair Davis.
Present.
And 4 of 5 are here. We have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance, which I will do tonight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. My last Pledge of Allegiance. Here. Here. Stop. Okay, so does anybody wish to so we move on to reordering of and additions to the agenda. Does anyone wish to reorder or add anything to the agenda tonight? Seeing none, we'll consider that to be none. Okay, at this point, I would like to open the public comment period. I now invite members of the public to address the Planning Commission. Speakers are invited to 3 minutes, speaking once, both on and off agenda items. All questions should be directed through the presiding officer. This is your time to speak uninterrupted, Glendora. If you are in attendance, please fill out a speaker card and submit it to the recording admin before the close of the public comment period. Once recognized, speakers should advance to the podium, state your name and the subject matter you wish to discuss. If you are participating via Zoom, select the raised hand icon in Zoom before we close the public comment period. Once recognized, you will receive a request to unmute. State your name and the subject matter you wish to discuss. I now invite those in attendance to speak. Do we have any public comment cards?
Thank you, Chair. At this time, we received no requests via the email, a public email, no requests from attendees or public comment cards to give comment.
Okay, with that, I will close the public comment period. Okay, so moves us to the commissioner statements and reports. Do any of the commissioners have any statements or reports? I would just like to say, I don't know if this is more apropos for the end of the meeting or now. Brian, we hardly knew you. We will miss your presence, and I hope all is well and things are well. Okay, with that, we'll move on to director, staff, liaison, and attorney statements. Does community director, Mr. Kugel, have anything to provide?
Just real quickly to dovetail on what Chair Davis indicated, that today we received Mr. Ursetti's resignation letter from the Planning Commission effective today. And so I will too miss him on the commission, wish him well, hope to see him back again someday. That's all I have to report tonight.
Thank you, Director. City Attorney Lana Lehman.
Nothing for me to report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, special items. I now turn the meeting over to the clerk who will conduct the selection of chair and vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I declare the office of Chair and Vice Chair vacant. Nominations are now in order for Chair. Are there any nominations for Chair?
I will nominate Paulette Koss for chair.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for Chair? Seeing none, I declare that Paulette Koss is Chair of the Planning Commission. Congratulations, Chair Koss. Nominations are now in order for Vice Chair. Are there any nominations for Vice Chair?
I nominate Commissioner Norwood.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for Vice Chair? Hearing none, I declare that Commissioner Norwood is Vice Chair of the Planning Commission. Congratulations. So now incoming Chair will conduct the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you. All right. So right now, it looks like we are at the public hearing, and so I'm calling on Senior Planner Hans Friedel to report. I said that right, didn't I? Friedel. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get it right next time.
Chair and commissioners, and congratulations. Good evening. I'm here tonight to provide a high-level update on some of our advanced and long-range planning projects and tasks that will be coming before the commission probably over the next 1, maybe even 2 years. And this isn't going to be all inclusive, but it'll give you some big picture stuff that we'll be working on, and I'll be working on with y'all in council as well, and the citizens of Glendora. Next slide, please. So, specifically, I'm here to talk about 6 things tonight. And I do intend for this to be conversational. So if staff has something they would like to add, or if you have a question or something on one of the slides or one of the tasks, please feel free to stop me and we can talk about that and not wait till the end. But specifically tonight, I'm going to be talking about the housing element work plan, update on that, a request for proposals or RFP for objective design standards, miscellaneous code updates, RFP for general plan elements and the local hazard mitigation plan, an update on our wireless telecommunication facilities on private property and non-right-of-way property ordinance, which will be actually at the next, should be coming on the next meeting, and an SB9 update, which I've managed to get in here as well. So, and we're talking a little bit about talking to council about the ordinance and conveying some of your feedback on that. So next slide, please. So housing element work plan. So, in April, Planning Commission and City Council provided staff direction at the joint meeting on a list of priorities and tasks to streamline and remove barriers to housing as required by our housing element and state law. Currently, the housing element is in its 3rd round review with HCD in the state. The delay in kind of getting it certified has held up a lot of the long range planning tasks here, because a lot of them are sort of predicated on having a certified housing element. It's a very important part of our general plan as mandated by the state. So when we get that certified, it's going to sort of tee up a lot of stuff that you'll see coming before you. I'll talk about some more of that in a minute here. So it's the foundational document to much of our advanced planning work here at the city and in many of our neighboring cities as well. Staff is working to further bundle sort of those tasks and that sort of work plan into projects that will be coming before you again in the next couple of years. You'll see some of them probably in the next year. Next slide, please. So this is a big one. It's a request for proposals for objective design standards. This actually went out today. This has got published on, we use a system called Quest, which is like a clearinghouse for RFPs. California State Senate Bill 35 requires cities to establish objective design standards for multifamily, residential, and qualifying mixed-use developments. Objective design standards streamline housing and promote economic development by clarifying the city's desired development characteristics while creating predictability for property owners, developers, and residents. This is a large project. As current design guidelines, not standards, and I'll kind of explain what the difference is in a minute here, are distributed throughout the zoning code, the specific plans, Route 66 and Arrow Highway being probably the most significant of those. This involves amending, repealing, and replacing large sections of code and specific plans. Next slide, please. So our current design guidelines are mostly subjective and distributed throughout the zoning code and specific plans. Some examples, here's one that I pulled. All projects within the town center mixed use district should demonstrate pedestrian orientation. Should being the subjective word there. Subjective, the overuse of stucco facade treatment is discouraged. That when I think of overuse for stucco, what the applicant might think of overuse for stucco, and what the commission might think, individual members might think the overuse of stucco, we might all be in sort of different places with that. So, and an example of an objective standard would be stucco shall make up no more than 50% of a facade treatment. That's something that you can check on a box and say, yes, we've achieved that. And the state, again, requires that for multifamily, residential, eligible residential mixed use developments. Next slide, please. So the RFP went out today, as I mentioned. This is going to cover development types, residential, commercial, mixed use, and industrials. Our intent is to sort of expand it to all development types. One of the things that we've talked a little bit about and put in the RFP is exploring for like commercial developments in particular, and probably multifamily as well, sort of a scoring system to allow some flexibility. So you might have like 30 or 40 required items, and Covina has an example of this in their code. They have an overlay district that does this. And so we might require, let's say there's 40 items such as, pedestrian orientation, some certain design treatments, a plaza, things like that. And they hit, let's say 25 of these, and the developer has a choice of 25 of 40, then they hit a certain score whereby we can make a finding and a recommendation of approval, that sort of a thing. So that's that way that there's some, even though they're standards, not guidelines, you've removed some of the flexibility, you've put some of that flexibility back in there where a developer has some choice. And I worked at a city that did this, and the development community actually liked it quite a bit because they had some say in sort of what mix of things they could do. So this involves, again, revisions, repealments, and amendments to the zoning code. It's a pretty big project. It will also include public engagement, probably some open houses, hearings, et cetera. We'll be working with whatever our selected consultant or whoever our selected consultant is on that. It's partially grant funded too, with SB2 funds. And we anticipate work on this to start over really the next 3 quarters of 2023. So with sort of an award for consultants sort of late this year. Next slide, please. Miscellaneous code updates. So there's a variety of code revisions necessary to streamline housing development, improve the administration of the zoning code. There's a lot of stuff here to sort of unpack, but kind of at the 30,000 foot view. The current code, just an example, has like different setbacks if an ADU is attached or detached. So if it's detached, it's 3 feet. If it's attached, it's 4 feet. Things like that. We've got a lot of other little things in there. We've got one now that's a tough one for folks where we have a limit on 2 detached structures being no more than 1,000 feet in someone's yard at your house, for example. But state law says we can't have a standard for SB9 or ADUs that limits them to less than 800 square feet. So we get this weird situation where somebody has, maybe they've got a 150 square foot shed and it's got a 3 foot setback, and they want to do an ADU, but it's attached or it's within 6 feet of the primary residence, which we then consider attached. And so then it has a 4 foot side setback. And we have to figure out what the difference between 1,000 down to 8. So it would be 850 square feet is the biggest it can be. And then if you throw in an SB9 secondary unit, then we get into that sort of area where with that, we allow detached garages for the policy, but not for the ADU because we don't require parking. So it becomes very just complicated at the counter. So we want to kind of simplify and sort of streamline that stuff. So maybe we just have one setback for side and rear for attached and detached ADUs. That's just an example of the kind of things that will be coming before you for discussion. And so we'll think more through that stuff to sort of, because the different state laws and ADU law, SB9, they've sort of forced this kind of piecemeal approach by sort of preempting local control on certain issues and sort of having standards for this stuff where we're kind of playing catch up, if that makes sense. And so now that some of these things have been in place for a while, we can kind of do like a comprehensive rewrite of some of these sections and kind of reflect that in something that we can administer better. So this one, I think Staff anticipates that these revisions will come in wholly or in batches. I think there'll probably be a couple of batches of code updates before the Planning Commission and eventually City Council, probably over 2023 and 2024, at least the next year and a half, basically. Next slide. Please. Oh,
How about that? Will that be for us just to look at, make comment on, or turn back to you with suggestions or approval of something at that point in time?
well, and feel free to chime in, but I anticipate, as we work on these batches, to staff, to Jeff. But I anticipate these coming in batches, and essentially what we'll do is we'll have probably a red line version of our current zoning code where staff has made some recommendations, which then we will discuss, and then you might direct us to go back and make some changes. Maybe we'll come back and then you'll make the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council, and then it will be processed as a code update or ordinance revision, amendment, et cetera.
Yeah, and all of the code updates that Hans is talking about were on the list of action items that the council adopted a few months ago in April. These are all things that are going to be listed in the housing element and are listed in the draft that they're reviewing right now. So, but Hans is right. What we'll do is we'll bring back the actual code language and then walk through that with the Planning Commission. But these are all things, there could be other things that as we're going through this, we say, hey, why don't we fix this too? So I can imagine some of that happening, but primarily these are on the list of, I think there were 32 or 33 action items that the council approved, and then we incorporated into the document. So
Thank you.
Just real quick on that. So something like setbacks. Would we be able to say we'd rather it be 3.5 feet or 4 feet rather than 2 feet or 5 feet? Will we have that kind of discretion, or is it? Will there be some discussion between staff and the commission?
yes, yeah, I think what we're trying to do is make it consistent. So what we're trying to solve is this: we're trying to balance between, okay, this is what the code was, let's say 5 years ago. These are additional state mandates, and now we've got a complicated situation at the counter because we've got code before, let's say 2017, and then the code changes we've made since 2017, primarily to deal with ADUs and SB9 and some other things. So what we'll bring to, we want to have a discussion on what that setback will be for attached and detached structures, because we are talking about what the effect could change what you're allowed to do in your backyard.
And it's basically just coming up with some guidelines for that. And then, as you said, the person who's developing can kind of choose which of those particular items they from a list of acceptable items.
For larger projects, we would
Okay.
have like multifamily or mixed use in particular, we would have, we anticipate something like that. For these single family things like ADUs, detached garages, 3 and 4, it needs to be, an objective standard. Your
Right.
setbacks 3 feet or 4 feet or something. And you will have discretion. Like if we want to eventually maybe allow ADUs above garages or something like that, we can do that as long as what we decide to do doesn't contradict state law. Like we can't require a setback greater than 4 feet for an ADU on the rear and side, that sort of thing. But if you want to be 3 or 2 or none, we can do that too.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I'd say just on that is, it's not just going to be setbacks. Remember, some of those items are bigger kind of pictures that we really don't know how to draft. Remember, we had some about like 50% of the commercial mixed use ones, and we had no idea really how we're going to work, and we'll need that discussion to help us understand that what makes up the 50% of the commercial and the residential mix and what's entailed and all that kind of thing that we had previously discussed as wanting to incorporate mixed use, and how you incorporate and what the rules are. That's sort of part of the discussion we'll be having too.
there's a lot of other stuff with design too, like height limits, and do we want to break the planes up, and massing and Florida area ratio. So there's all this other sort of stuff, parking, things like that can kind of, impact that sort of stuff. Some fun stuff too, like, park or, landscaping requirements and things
Right.
like that. So.
Hans, I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but I was approached the other day by just a neighbor who was asking about the ADU.
Mm.
Apparently, someone has asphalted their entire front yard so that they could park in the front yard, so that they could put the ADU in the backyard, and the area that they left with the grass now has lawn chairs, a fire pit, and a jumpy. So they've taken everything out of the backyard and put it into the front yard. So they're like, what are the regulations? What are the codes on this? What's happening to my neighborhood? Are we going to have meetings in the community to talk about these things?
That's a really great thing to bring up. We've gotten quite a few calls since I've been here about, and Jeff may want to weigh in on this, about paving over front yards in some capacity or not beyond like a circular driveway. So a couple of things here. So with an ADU, people can convert their garages to ADUs under state law. We cannot require additional parking or any parking for ADUs. That's the way it is. With SB9 and secondary units, we can, but not with ADUs. And if it's within a certain distance of transit and that sort of thing. So that's one issue. They do need to put the cars somewhere if they're going to have cars. The second thing is we don't have something, some cities' codes have certain limits on impervious cover. You probably see that, maybe you can, like I've worked at one city, it was 60%. You had to have at least 60% of your yard permeable or some sort of landscaping or something like that. We don't really have that for single family development here. I think the only place we do is actually where the car wash, the Fast Five was. And remember we talked about that when that came before you. So to that extent, there are some standards we have or policies about circular driveways. So there is some control over that in the front yard. It's like driveway spacing. You have to have a certain minimum width lot of 70 feet, that kind of thing. But there's nothing that says you can't pave over your front yard.
Right. Yeah. We don't have regulations that, for example, require a percentage of impermeable surface in your front yard. There are regulations in the code for property maintenance that, prohibit overgrown or unkept landscaping. But if you've paved your entire front yard, it's a very neat,
Right.
look.
Potentially.
But, the only negative part is that there increases water runoff into the street. So I would say the issue of paving your front yard primarily to use for parking, that has been going on for many years, if not many decades. And we can see that just driving up and down Foothill Boulevard or any, of the residential neighborhoods in the city. People over time, there are probably more cars per household than, let's say, they were 30 years ago. So that's been happening for a very long time. What does appear to be somewhat new is that in cases where you're building now ADUs, that now there's even more of a need. And so there are a couple of instances. So there's usually what people do is they pave all of their front yard except for, I'll call it like a little landscaping patch in the middle. And that's been going on for many years, decades, probably. However, recently we've seen some people decide, why do I need the little patch of landscaping? I'm just going to pave the whole thing. And so optically that has become, so occasionally we'll receive calls on that. And there's probably a handful of homes that have gone that far with it. But up until we saw that, it hadn't been an issue.
But those are the kind of things that we'll be discussing, correct?
We could
in the
discuss that.
upcoming
Yeah,
months? Okay.
that's not on our list, but it's an aesthetic thing. I think the question the city has to ask is, it's always about where to put the automobile primarily.
Right.
So
But
that's another.
I just think the
question.
discussion of aesthetics needs to be included at some point. I
Absolutely.
don't know how much, obviously how much control we have over that, but I think, we want things to look pretty, or at least not ugly, so maybe have, include that as well.
The individual that mentioned it to me let me know that they had moved an entire family into the ADU and there were several new cars, and this was becoming a very big problem for her. And it's just one person. So I just imagine there's probably other people that are looking at this as well.
We'll have to think about with things like that, how to come up with some sort of an objective standard for that, like a limit on imperviousness, and balance that, with things to think about with how to deal and treat with cars, knowing that we can't require parking for an ADU, but knowing that they'll probably have some cars. Do we want to set that limit? on paving such that the cars end up on the street, which is an issue, you know, we don't really allow that in most of the city. And so there's some things to think about, but those are, if it's objective and those are the kind of things that, you know, some aesthetics, you can have aesthetic standards. We just have to think about wording those in such a ways that like, you know, it's objective and not the yard should look nice or that kind of thing, because that wouldn't.
One other thing, can an ADU go in the front yard? I mean, if you have a big front yard setback, can they build an ADU in the front yard?
The answer is yes. So the basically the way it is with our current code, and also some of this is what the state says, you know, you have to allow too. The state allows us, same with SB 9 secondary units for that matter too, to have the same front setback for the ADU or secondary SB 9 unit as the primary residence would have. So for example, it's like 20 feet in some of the zoning districts. So if your house primary residence is set back, let's say it's a big lot, it's set back 50 feet from the street, from the property line, not the street, but the property line. Then, and you can put an ADU in there that meets that 20-foot setback. And we also don't allow parking within the 20-foot setback, although people do it. It has to show the spaces out of it if we require that for SB 9. Then yes, the ADU could go in front of the house. And in fact, we had an application, it was like maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago or something that I reviewed, where there was an existing small house that was only like 900 something square feet. And they were basically going to build the primary house in the big backyard and make the existing small house an ADU. But that could happen from scratch as well if you wanted to develop that.
It's
way.
not just one. We've had several examples actually built. with
One-
them
yeah,
that's
one
the
that
case,
I
but
worked
it
on,
usually is
yeah.
an older house that's way in the back and then you give room in the front to build.
Commissioner Norwood's been waiting.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Commissioner,
Go ahead.
go ahead. I'm trying to,
But you've,
Go ahead.
well, actually, you brought up a couple
Okay.
points, other questions, since we're talking about the ADUs. So building an ADU in the front, they still have to meet the minimum setback that's established by the city zoning as far as setbacks from the property line, which is, I think you said 20 feet, or is it different in different areas?
It can vary a little bit, but it's generally 20 feet. Is there,
Yeah,
is there
it's
anywhere
either-
it's 25 or
It's
30
either
maybe?
20 or 25 feet. And in the hillside, so the city has, this is other thing we might look at. The city has, I think, 7 single-family zoning districts.
Right.
Some
Okay,
have different
so,
setbacks.
huh?
It goes from 20 to 35.
So go.
Yeah.
20 to, yeah, depending on which
The
of the
biggest is
zones you're
35
in.
feet.
So,
Okay. But they have to have the same setback.
Mhm.
So it's, the
Yeah, you-
state didn't impose anything so that the front setback is different than, and for an ADU, not necessarily the zoning for a single family residence is different.
no, the state law just established that a minimum side and rear setback.
Right.
It didn't say anything about the front
That,
setback.
you said that includes the parking?
Yes, technically, you know, a parking space is not supposed to be
Okay, 'cause
located
I
within
would-
their front
I'm
yard.
guessing that some like, they're gonna, and again, do they have to pull a permit? Can they just asphalt their
Nope.
lawn, or do they need some kind of city input on that?
So no permit is required just for paving on your property.
So they can lay asphalt or cement, doesn't matter.
Yes.
Okay.
Pavers.
Ho-
yeah.
However, what is required, if you do let's say, for example, we get a lot of applications for circular driveways. And so Public Works issues a permit for a new driveway apron and the curb work because that's in the public right of way. But if it's on your property, you don't have to get a
About
permit.
approachways. You got a driveway and I decide to pave mine, but I'm gonna share, my driveway so they can park basically what used to be my front yard. Is it,
If it's in the public right of way, you have to get a permit for any work you do. And if it's on your private property, it's,
so a new approachway, cut the curb.
yes.
I need to go to this.
You
Okay.
do. But yes, you bring up, even though technically, the code does say there a parking space, a legal parking space in your front yard is not allowed. People use their front yards to park cars on them all day long. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just something that is, and I don't think that the city could roll back the clock on that.
We have no
mean,
way
but
of when we walk through. a
it's one of
neighborhood to
those-
Know where the property line is.
Yeah, it's
anyway.
one of those issues where it's just been going on for so
I
long.
guess my point would be, I got my one approachway, I throw concrete all over my front yard so I can park more cars, but ultimately I'm just gonna drive over the curb or throw some blocks down to, and
That, I haven't seen that as much. Usually people will want a larger apron. People apply for larger aprons. They apply for multiple aprons. That is very common.
Okay.
That's very
That was
common. So
my question.
keep, but the code does say, you bring up a good point, and it was specifically written this way, is that for RVs, if you have to park your RV in the back or the rear, the code says, and if you have to jump the curb, you have to jump the curb.
I don't get an
because-
apron.
Because because the city does limit the location and number of aprons that you get for a single family. It's sort of, you'd be surprised all of the conversations we have with homeowners over
Right.
So
this issue. But this is not really.
I'm going to try to get us back on track here.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know we'll have a lot of discussions about ADUs and RVs and all kinds of things in the next couple months.
That's
So,
something that needs to be part of the cleanup.
right.
If you're talking about the ADUs and what
Right.
you brought up as far as throwing the concrete, I mean, aprons should be part of that discussion so that, because it will become, got an ADU and there's 3 cars.
So can you include aprons in the
Sure.
discussion?
I think
and-
it's all
one of
rolled
our
in with the
structures.
parking
Yeah.
of cars in your front yard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we talked, I mentioned kind of bundling some of these
Yeah.
things together as we kind of redline this stuff. And as Mark had mentioned, there's probably some things in there that we just as staff have struggled with and are a little unclear, and we can kind of take this as an opportunity to sort of clean some of that stuff up too.
Great. Thank you.
And not to belabor the setbacks, but I do want to add for clarity, the front setback, I did remember this for 20 to 35 feet, or the average of the homes on either side is the other thing too. So if your homes are set back real far, and that's an issue too. Some people have, they're next to a corner lot and the house is set way back or something. And so their setback becomes de facto bigger than that, bigger than 20 feet or something. And so we could stuff like that. We can
It'll be
talk
some
about.
interesting discussions for sure.
Yeah, we'll get some good graphics and stuff so we can kind of show what these different things look like and some of these examples and stuff. Okay, good discussion. I think that's, I'm gonna catch back up with myself here. I think that's it for the miscellaneous code update. So next slide, please. Okay, so RFP for general plan elements. This has already gone out. California law requires general plans for cities, which is the master plan, future vision for growth, et cetera, to include the mandatory elements of land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise and safety, and also to consider environmental justice now. And that can be done in some different ways. Next slide, please. So we've released an RFP for some elements of the general plan. So we talked in the beginning, I mentioned that the housing elements in its 3rd round of review with the state, that is one of the big important elements of the general plan. Other elements that need to be updated are the safety element. It was last updated. The current one is from 2007. So it's pretty old. The environmental justice element, which is something that's new. We don't have that. And you're required to either have policies or explore that and work it into other parts of the general plan, or to have a standalone element, which we've decided would be simpler to have that in one place when you update 2 or more elements of your general plan. So we've done, by doing housing and having safety now out, it triggers environmental justice element. So that's part of this RFP. And so that's something that's new. And then also a local hazard mitigation plan. Our current one, we thought that made sense to do that with the safety element. A lot of cities do that because they're so related. A lot of topics will be related. Our current one was adopted in 2015. So it's kind of at the end of its life cycle now. So this will be an update of that. And we will be working with the police on that as well. So they have a staff member who will be kind of going with planning on that.
Maybe you can elaborate what the RFP is for. It's for consultants to.
Yes, the RFPs will be for consultants to basically work with us on creating these new elements and updates of elements of our general plan. And same for all the other stuff I was talking about too, objective design standards and stuff.
So
So-
this is the first part of what will be a major project with lots of outreach to the community, because the city's general plan, as Hans is indicating, most of the chapters, we call them, the state law calls them elements, but they're really chapters of a large document. They're closing in on 20 years old. Sometimes you'll hear us talk about Community Plan 2025. Well, that's the last time we updated comprehensively all of the chapters of the general plan was in the early 2000s, and that was completed roughly between 2004 and 2006. So with the housing elements or the chapter on housing, we're going to adopt that or pretty soon. And now we're starting to do some of the other elements that need to be updated when we're updating the housing element. And then shortly thereafter, we'll start to address other chapters. The big ones are land use and circulation, which probably circulation, I think, is becoming a little bit of a dated term, but some people are calling them mobility elements. There's air quality. We could update our historic preservation chapter. All of these things are major undertakings that require lots of community outreach. And if you were around during the period during 2004, when the community was having lots of different meetings and getting input from the community on what direction the city should go and incorporate into policy, that is really what has guided us for the last nearly 20 years, that document. And so now this is a big project. And so what he's saying is that we have to have an environmental justice element that's new. We have to update our safety element, which actually has to do with how we deal with natural disasters. And likewise, our local hazard mitigation plan also is how we deal with natural disasters. So those are the documents we'll be working on in the next year. But after that, probably in 24, sometime we'll be really start to talk about doing a more comprehensive update to the general plan. And that's a major, major project.
I have a question. When you ask requests for proposals and you talk about consultants, is there one consultant that does all of these articles, or is there a separate consultant for each article?
So for these three, the objective design standards that I talked about at the beginning, that would be one consultant and they can have sub-consultants, like they could have a designer or something with their proposal to us. That is one RFP, so that would ostensibly be one consultant for that. These three were bundled together as one RFP. So again, the consultant might, I anticipate we'll get an RFP where someone's good, they'll do the safety and the environmental justice element, but maybe they'll contract out with somebody for the local hazard mitigation plan or vice versa. Sometimes they'll have a special sub-consultant will work on the environmental justice element. Bless you. That's also common as well to do
Okay,
that.
thank you.
So next slide, please. I know that I think this one, yeah. So talked about this a little bit, but state law requires safety elements to address the protection of people from unreasonable risks associated with disasters, including earthquakes, floods, fires is a huge one here, and landslides. Again, current element is outdated and from 2007. Next slide, please. Okay, Senate Bill, so environmental justice continued. So talk about that a little bit. Senate Bill 1000 requires jurisdictions with disadvantaged communities to incorporate environmental justice policies into their general plans. State law requires environmental justice policies to be incorporated into the general plan upon the adoption of the next revision of two general elements, which we just talked about. California defines, I did put this in there, environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people of all races, cultures, incomes, and national origins with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of laws, regulations, and policies. Next slide, please. And the local hazard mitigation plan, again, the current plan was adopted in 2015. It needs to be updated every 7 years. Certified by FEMA. Makes sense to update this with the safety element, as there's going to be some overlap in sort of that analysis of hazards and risks in the community. And I did mention this, police department will take the lead in managing this update with planning assistance, basically, of that portion of these three things. Next slide, please. The RFP for these elements and local hazard mitigation plan are currently out, and we'll review and score the submissions and anticipate selecting a consultant to partner with us by the end of October. We talked about this a little bit, and Jeff did too. Work will include, robust public engagement, meetings, stuff beyond just hearings. There'll probably be some open houses, things like that, to occur over the first 3 quarters of 2023. So you'll be part of that process, and it will be before you, and we'll have some public meetings and some other special meetings likely with these long-range planning projects. We anticipate adoption of these elements hopefully in late 2023. Next slide, please. Okay, so wireless facilities on private property. So section 2103-100 of the zoning code, wireless telecommunication facilities. And this is basically governs wireless facilities on private and non-public right-of-way property. So private property also includes like city parks in this sense because it's not in the right-of-way. The current code is out of compliance with federal law and FCC rules as it requires discretionary review for a lot of wireless applications that now must be approved administratively. Congress enacted section 6409A of the Spectrum Act in 2012, so it's been about 10 years now, to streamline state and local government review of requests for wireless facilities. And this was to help promote and streamline and remove barriers for 5G deployment. If every community in the country has their own set of standards and these big, AT&T and Verizon and Spectrum, whom the act, is sort of the title of the act, wouldn't be able to get this stuff deployed. And so the sort of federal government stepped in and FCC stepped in and said, hey, within certain parameters, you have to approve these things non-discretionary and put shot clocks on them. So co-locations of wireless facilities that do not involve a substantial change and define what a substantial change is, and they talk about how much taller it can be or wider and sort of things like that on an existing tower or facility must be permitted. And so the good news is we are complying with the federal rules. Most of what we get, I put this picture up here on the slide. That's a current, one of the what's called a monopole stealth pine wireless tower, and they change out those little antennas on there, and we process that as a building permit, and we just make sure that they're not defeating the existing sort of stealthing and stuff that's there. Technically under the code, each one of those change outs should be a CUP amendment that would come before Planning Commission, and we can't do that. And these happen all the time. It's kind of like ADUs. There's a ton of volume of this stuff where they change out those little antenna arrays and stuff. So we need to update the code to be compliant with federal law.
Can I interrupt you for a
Sure.
second? I remember earlier, several months ago, we had on the agenda a cell phone tower here in the city, and there was a lot of debate about, what it looked like and do we still have those types of options that, yes, there are certain things that are standard, but do we still have say so in aesthetically, like what it's going to look like, how they're going to disguise it? Or is that now standardized nation?
And it kind of depends on the class of application that's submitted. So basically there's three, and we'll see this at the next meeting, we're going to bring the ordinance. So there's basically three broad classes of these things. There's what's called an eligible facilities request, or an EFR, which is basically something that goes on an existing facility. So like that tower there, it's already built, like if that water tower were already built, or maybe a building that has them stealthed behind the parapet of a structure. If they're already there, it's an existing site and it's within parameters, which, it's 10% taller, not more than that, or 20 feet, not more than so much wider. They go down to like not more than so many ground cabinets. There's all this sort of stuff. Then we basically have to approve it through a building permit. We do, in terms of aesthetics, your question with those, basically it allows us to say they can't defeat whatever existing stealthing is there. So like in that example in the picture up there, it's a pine tree. If they want to put some more on there, we can say they have to be green. They have to match. They can't make the pine tree disappear. If it's a site that doesn't have any stealthing, and there's some old ones kind of like that, maybe an old industrial building or something just has the antennas just stuck to the outside of the wall, we can't require extra stuff. We can ask, sometimes they'll do it. We'll say, hey, could you paint that white? Sometimes they'll do it, to match the building or something like that, but we can't require. The second class, and I don't know if Lana wants to jump in. The second she's looking at me. The second class is kind of like, we were going to call them minor wireless facilities permit, but small permits. That's going to be when there's a new facility located on an existing structure and that where there wasn't one before. So like if there was a building that doesn't have any of these things in the parapet wall, let's say, of the top of the building, and I'll have pictures when I come next month with this, you'll get to see visually what these look like. We then have a little bit of discretion and can require it to be stealth. Again, there's a shot clock that the government says it's like 60 days to approve it. And we're proposing making those administrative with director approval. So we'll have some controls over that, and we have some objective sort of guidelines and design standards sort of worked into our code about that. Now, to your question about the aesthetics on a brand new tower. So the water tower was not an existing facility that we had there was a faux water tower that in the park in South Hills that I think that was what, April that I brought that before you. It was a CUP extension, something like that, where there's a brand new tower or could be, we then have some more discretion with that. And so the way that the ordinance is drafted that we'll bring before you, we have sort of like preferred locations, which is, no more than further than 100 feet. No, so we have 100-foot setback to residential. Parks are preferred location, industrial properties, stuff like that. Discouraged locations would be like in a residential area. And so they have to sort of make a case that if there's nowhere else, there's no other possible way they could put this thing, in a preferred location, then that has to be part of their sort of request and justification. Those will still come before Planning Commission. As a new facility, you can still have aesthetics, just like we did with the sort of, there's like a orange logo artwork piece on the water tower. We could still do stuff like that for brand new ones that they're building under the new code.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I will add a couple of points there. So first of all, one of the legal concerns that has changed under the FCC latest orders is that we can't just outright restrict these facilities. We can't prohibit them from a specific zone. So that's why we've created sort of this spectrum of preferred locations, discouraged locations, and then really discouraged locations. And as you go down that list, they have to provide more and more evidence that they really need this facility if it's in a discouraged location. So that's number one. And number two, with respect to facilities that are located on city-owned property, because we are actually the proprietors, call us the landlords of that property, we do have even more controls over the aesthetics, the possible license fees that we can charge, and the look and the location of that facility, regardless of what size it is, because we're acting in that instance, we're acting in our proprietary capacity as opposed to our merely regulatory capacity.
Great, thank you.
And just to add something that we have someone here, the staff who does that and works on those agreements, and we sort of separate those two roles. So as a planner, I'll review it according to the code, but if, Valerie, if the staff member who works on that wants to add in some other aesthetic stuff or something like that, like one in a park, we can say we want it to be this kind of a tree or that kind of a tree or something like that. They absolutely can do that as the property owner in that case. So, and so could a private property owner too. I think next slide, please. And I think, our current code I mentioned, it hasn't been updated since 2014. So it's really old and it's out of compliance with both federal law and rulemaking and state stuff too. The bottom line is that our code update will comply with federal law, and we'll put what we can in there about aesthetic controls and discouraged locations and things like that. And this section of the code will be completely replaced. We anticipate in late 2022 or 2023, and that will come before you. You'll make a recommendation to City Council, and they'll have a first and second reading of this new ordinance. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think this is sort of my last slide here, but it's an SB9 update, and the way I got this, we're talking about this in sort of long range planning projects. We went to council in June to provide the same SB9 update that I provided to this commission earlier in the year. And I wanted to add that, confirm basically that Planning Commission's position, which was instruction to staff to continue with the policy framework in lieu of drafting an ordinance to kind of get a few applications in hand and sort of see how it works, and kind of also see how things play out with the state and local jurisdictions in California. I'll report that City Council confirmed your position, said they agree with that. And so they would like to just wait and kind of see how the policy plays out before we decide to if we decide to move forward with an ordinance, we will, with some of these previous ordinance updates that we talked about, cleaning some of these things up, we'll pick up some of this stuff by having objective design standards and standardizing our setbacks. And so in that sense, some of the SB 9 stuff will become clearer through our code, which will apply to ADUs as well. But council agreed with your position, and so we'll continue with the policy. Just, I'm just throwing this in there. We still have not received an SB 9 application, so it's September now. So it's 9 months. We could have, I think I talked about all the reasons why we think that is, problems with lending and some of these things. And that's, we've not had an application for a lot split or additional units. Interest, at the counter and over the phone sort of ebbs and peaks based on really the best I can tell is what houses are for sale in the city. So if there's a house for sale on Zillow and it's a bigger lot, I'll get 2 or 3 emails or calls about somebody who wants to split it or do this sort of SB 9 option or with it. And then, we'll get to some, they'll have some concepts that might work or might not. And then that's kind of the last I hear from them. So that's been sort of the theme throughout this year. So maybe at some point we'll get an application for a secondary unit, like 2 ADUs. I don't know why that hasn't happened yet, but I anticipate at some point that'll happen. And I think that's the conclusion. So again, it's not everything. There's going to be a lot of other projects that come along and things we work on that are related to long range planning. And as Jeff alluded to, there's a whole lot of stuff coming in the future with other elements of the general plan and probably some studies of housing sites and things like that. That'll be, fun and I hope, exciting to work on. And they'll be coming before Planning Commission and get to weigh in on them. So if any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, go ahead.
So my question, and it's probably for Jeff also, we talked about the SB 9 and the ADU. We had that joint meeting in April. Can you kind of give us an update where you kind of glossed over it real quick, but where are we at with the state? Have we had further discussions? Are we closer to the finish line, or are we kind of in the same place we were in April?
So after the April meeting, we spent a lot of time over the summer really going through all the state's comments on our housing element from the second submittal to the state. And really making sure that we fully addressed a lot of their comments with regard to the portion of the element that talks about fair housing, spending a lot of time beefing up our analysis of our housing sites, because that was an area that there were a lot of comments from the state. Also adding the list of things that the council and commission authorized us to include into the housing element draft. So we have submitted it for an informal review by the state to make sure we're on the right track. And so I'm expecting the response from that in a couple of weeks later toward the end of this month. If we are on the right track, hopefully we'll just have to make a few more minor revisions and then submit hopefully for certification. So we'll find out at the end of the month how close all of the work we've done over the summer is to getting a certified housing element. Last time I checked, and it's been a while, it's been maybe about 30 days, but there were still around only 10% of the agencies in the SCAG region who have received a certified housing element. Now the state, so I know they're very busy because I think now they don't approve housing elements statewide. They move from region to region. So now all the folks at the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level I think it's the Bay Area cities that are now going through the same thing we were doing about a year ago. So they're very busy up there. And hopefully the cities in our region, the SCAG region, will start getting more approved housing elements. So I haven't heard much about any other cities. Last time on a sub-regional level, we have the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, or the COG, and there's a planning technical advisory committee. A couple weeks ago, or I think it was last week, when they went around the round table and asked how many more cities have a certified housing element. There was nobody new who had a certified housing element in our region. I think the only ones in the COG in our COG region, our sub-region, are, I think, the city of San Gabriel, the city of Duarte, and I think that's it in our region of 25 or so cities in the San Gabriel Valley. So
I heard anecdotally that only like 7% in California have one. So whatever the number is, the vast majority of cities do not have a certified housing
So-
element at this.
so
Commissioner-
we're still working diligently. Hopefully.
Oh, I'm
we'll
good.
have one.
That's fine. By the
Commissioner
time they
Davis,
approve
you
it,
had a
it'll
question?
be like, we'll be in housing element 7.
Yeah, but we'll be working on the next cycle.
Yeah.
Commissioner Davis, you had a question?
The RFPs, how many firms does this go out to?
So the way it works is we use a system called Quest, and it's like an online, like a clearinghouse, if you want. And so we upload it there, and then they know they check this for different cities in California. We
Potentially
also-
hundreds.
It could be a lot, yeah. And then we send it. The other thing is we send it. It gives us a link. There's like a URL to this Quest posting. They have to ask all their questions. There's a whole process. It's very transparent through this system. But we send them. We can send the URL to it. Hey, we've got some RFPs out to anybody. So we've sent it to a list of consultants as well, just saying FYI, we've got RFPs out, just so it's even more on their radar if they weren't checking Quest.
How many will you narrow that down to? And then once you narrow it down, does that go to the council for final approval?
So what will happen is they will submit and then we'll score them. So there's a scoring, like a rubric in the RFP, basically like a chart we score on different categories. And so staff will score them. So we'll put together, a small committee of staff members to basically review and score the RFPs. And there's things like, calling references. They have to provide references in other cities and communities they've worked with, samples of work, stuff like that. And then we'll just look at the overall quality. Does it like something that meets our objectives? And so we'll down select. So it kind of is based on how many good applications we get that, and so let's say it's 3 good ones, then we'll score the best one that passes that. Will then the final contract, work that stuff out, and then it goes to council, basically. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Senior Planner Friedel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item is public hearings, and I understand there are no public hearings today. So consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar will be enacted by one motion without individual discussion unless a commissioner has requested it be removed for separate discussion. Does anyone wish to pull or comment on any of the consent calendar items? Okay, hearing none. I'm requesting a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. If you can use the voting client to do so,
Oh,
to make that motion in second.
Have to-
Oh, that's going to be hard. Okay, so we had Commissioner Davis, right?
Correct.
Motioned. And Commissioner Becerra seconded. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open it, see if we can vote,
Okay,
and I'll do a roll call for the viewers. Commissioner Becerra,
Yes.
thank you. Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Norwood,
Yes.
and Chair Koss.
yes.
And that passes 4-0. Thank you.
All right, so the next thing is minutes? No, we did minutes was part of the consent calendar, right? Okay, so the next thing is member agenda items. Does anybody,
Actually, there is a receive and file of tract map number 82949.
how did I miss that?
Oh,
Sorry
we're
about
doing
that.
consent-
Sorry about
Rick,
that. That's part
Before
of
we
the
go too
consent.
far, this
Sorry
is
about-
showing me as abstained.
That will be fixed on there.
Okay.
Apologies. Yeah, that's how we do the oral roll call. We'll correct that in minutes.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry about that. It's my first time being chair, so I missed
That's
that.
okay.
Okay, so we're looking at the final track map.
So just
Nope,
as,
nope,
just to
we're-
recap,
Oh.
both items 4 and 5 were part of the consent and were both approved during the vote to approve the consent calendar. So
Okay,
now we're just going to move on to the remainder of the agenda.
okay.
Sorry, that was my fault.
Oh, okay. All right. So do any of the commissioners have anything for the agenda? Any agenda items?
So we have no member agenda items. Under agenda items, there are no items to be reviewed.
Okay, unfinished business?
There are also no items under new business.
Okay, Any new business? Okay, so how about commissioners and staff? Any closing comments from Commissioner Davis? Any closing comments?
Just wanted to thank everybody for bearing with me and my chairmanship and to wish Mr. Ursetti well in his future endeavors.
Commissioner Norwood, any closing comments?
No, well, yes, I just wish Brian, I know that he was very excited. I've known Brian a long time. I know he's very excited to get involved in some of the stuff going on in the city, knowing his job and especially in where we're at today in terms of the fire protection. I know he's disappointed he had to resign, but his job just wouldn't allow him to be here consistently, I don't believe.
Okay, Commissioner Becerra?
I do just want to thank Brian for his work as a firefighter, and I know it's a tough job. I wish he was here.
And I echo those sentiments. I feel like, we barely got to know him, but hopefully sometime in the future, he'll be able to serve again. Okay, so I think that's it. So then the only thing left is adjournment, correct? Okay, so we are adjourning this meeting at, I have 7:59